Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Lincoln Journal-Star's Life in the Red podcast. As usual, Luke Mullin and Amie Just here to break down all the relevant information for you folks. We got some basketball transfers to talk about, notably spring game preview, the main update today, and then we'll talk a little baseball and softball to close things out. I know it's been a week or two since we were last in here, so of course that basketball news trickled in, busy period as we said. We'll go over, of course, all that we learned over these last couple of weeks of spring practice heading into the spring game this weekend. Big weekend of Nebraska athletics here on campus. But we'll go over those transfer additions. Of course, some of these happened a couple weeks ago, but just want to share some quick thoughts about what it means for the roster and the teams moving forward. On the women's side, a little bit quieter than the men's, fewer scholarships to work with, but really important transfer, I think. Florida guard Alberta Rimdahl transferred. Seems to be a really big boost considering some of the guard depth might have been affected for this Nebraska team.
Yeah, I mean, you lose a couple guards, right? Josh Shelley being the number one there that you don't get back. I think it's going to be more of a seamless transition than you might otherwise would think, just because one of her old assistant coaches is now on Nebraska's staff and has been here for about a year. So I think it's a great fit. He knows her really well, what she can add, and I feel like she'll be pretty seamless.
Yeah, scoring, ball handling, all that important stuff. Again, and you look at last year, obviously they brought in Darian White, and she was able to help. I think Rimdahl, she's been playing at a really high level, so she will be able to fill that role, if not, have an even bigger part of this Nebraska women's team. But the men's team, of course, several open scholarships they had to work with. They've added several players. We talked about Andrew Morgan last time, but 3 new scholarship additions that we've had confirmed since then. First on that list, Rolly Worster, coming from Utah, should really help, I think, as a ball handling guard, right?
Yeah, this one's fun for me, considering I covered him when he was in high school. I think he has a little bit of work to do, but I think he's really good at distribution. He's got really good court vision. Some people may not like his efficiency from outside the arc, but there are other guys, namely who we will get to in a minute, who that'll be more of their specialty.
Yeah, so 18-year-old where you're like, oh, yeah, definitely this guy's going to be at Nebraska.
He was a sophomore in high school when I covered him.
Even more, huh?
So,
yeah, okay.
No, because at that time he was committed to the University of Montana. So things have definitely not gone according to the plan that 14-year-old Rolly Worster set out for himself, but I think he's accomplished quite a bit.
Yeah, funny how those coincidences end up coming up all the time, right?
Hey, man, I mean, I tweeted it out the other day, like the list of Montana to Nebraska, things that have happened over the last few years. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's certainly the pipeline, as you put it. It continues. Yeah.
There's some way. Here we are.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll see it down the road, other sports as well. But Worster, he's 6'4", also can maybe help with rebounding as well. A little bit bigger guard. So we've also got a couple sharp shooting transfers that Nebraska added to the team. Gavin Griffiths, he's coming over from Rutgers, 6'8". Really, again, he'd help with that spacing, you'd think, and certainly that 3-point shooting aspect of things.
Yeah, I think this will be a good fit. I'm a big fan of the goggles look. I think we need more of that in college basketball. But yeah, I think that he, showed flashes of what he could be at Rutgers, played for a coach that a lot of people really respect. I think he'll fit right in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ever since Wilhelm transferred, the goggles quota on this team has been too low.
Exactly. Well, we may see him this year.
True.
He's still at Washington. I think the transfer portal is always crazy.
Yeah, gotta keep on your toes with all these transfers. And the final one that Nebraska confirmed, Wisconsin transfer Connor Esijan, shooting guard. Again, 3-point quality there that they're bringing in.
I like it. He had an incredible freshman season. Not as productive last season for whatever reason, but I think that once he gets here and fits in, that you'll start to see maybe more of those freshman-like numbers from him.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, you look at these few transfers that Nebraska has been bringing in, and certainly, the summation, a lot of offensive talent, right? That's been a big focus for this offseason.
Yeah, well, they need to pivot and turn to the front court
Mm-hmm.
because William Kyle did not come here. That was one that they, I think, were hoping for, looking for. He was supposed to come on an official this week or next. I can't quite remember. But after he went on his official at UCLA, he pulled the trigger on that one. So definitely need to pivot and focus less on guards and more on bigs. Still haven't heard from Rink Mast and what he's going to do. I ran into him at the softball game. Still hanging out, enjoying life here in Lincoln. Hopefully he comes to a decision here soon. We didn't really talk about that. But yeah, so that's the one left standing from last year. So they need to find bigs yesterday.
Yep. Some more work to be done in the transfer portal for this Nebraska men's basketball team. Of course, we'll stay updated on that over these coming weeks, but we got an important spring scrimmage to talk about. Of course, how important it is, it depends on your perspective, whether you can make, these long-term projections off of this scrimmage, but obviously it's a great opportunity for the fans to get a look at the team, all the young players, transfers, people who they maybe have not gone through a spring yet as well, players who went through last fall, but, we've been privy, of course, to see a little bit of the practice action ourselves, to talk to all the different position coaches. And so before we preview this spring game, let's talk about the different position groups, what we've maybe learned about them this spring, who's been impressing and who you can expect to watch out there or maybe not watch out depending on their health this Saturday. And of course, you look at offense versus defense, you got that veteran defense, maybe a few more question marks on offense. So we'll start there on the offensive side of the ball. And it was interesting hearing from head coach Matt Rule this last Saturday. They've scrimmaged each of these last two Saturdays before the spring game, which is, of course, also a scrimmage. But he notably said this last Saturday, he said the defense won that day wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and then recently he's been more in favor of what the offense has been able to do, liked the long drives that they had this past week. So you wonder if the defense is going to bounce back this week with fans present. But yeah, no, we'll see. One is, obviously we've seen a little bit, right? But only bits and pieces, only a fragment of 11s. So, but no, I'm interested to see how the puzzle comes together.
Yep. And let's go position by position here. Of course, we got to start with the quarterbacks. A major topic of discussion all throughout this camp. Heinrich Harburg, Dylan Raiola, Daniel Kalen. How are those guys looking? And we've all heard, of course, positive things, about their practice efforts. But it's been a competition. And I think the perspective to have here is they're going to compete again on Saturday, but this is not going to settle anything by any means.
No. It's April. Almost to May, but it's still April. And as Matt Rule has said over and over and over again, this will continue until the season starts. This isn't going to just go away. One practice doesn't, tell the whole picture. But yeah, no, definitely an interesting one they've got going there.
I'm going to say all it takes, though, is one big, long touchdown pass, highlight play that people are going to be replaying all summer long, depending on how things shake out. So
dilute the Kool-Aid with more water. Doesn't need to be that strong.
Definitely.
So I know people, whatever happens on Saturday, people will overreact. And I hope that we don't do that, but it's an inevitability, I think.
Yep. Nature of the beast, definitely, with this type of thing. So again, those quarterbacks, they'll be competing, and this is something throughout the whole offense. There's a lot of different starting spots up for grabs or playing time distribution that will, of course, as I said, all this stuff will be decided in the fall, but you can make a big impact. You can show the coaches, certainly your quality throughout the spring and in the spring game. And in the running back room, there's a couple guys who haven't necessarily had that opportunity. Gabe Irvin, Ramir Johnson, they've been limited, but on the flip side, the standout has certainly been Emma Johnson, and that was, of course, built last season, when he took on that starting role. But from what we've heard, he's really continued impressing coaches throughout the spring.
Yeah, that's not surprising to me at all. You have to take advantage of the opportunity when it's given to you, and he has shown that he's done that. Obviously, a few miscues here and there, right? But, this is effectively his second year, right? So it'll be interesting to see what they'll do on Saturday with that room, how they're going to divvy up all of the snaps, because they've got a lot of guys in that room, especially transfer, some really young guys with minimal game experience. So I'm interested to see how that comes through.
Yeah, I'll be excited to get a good look at transfer Dante Dowdle. The coach is talking about how he's one of those bigger, powerful backs. And, Rule said today, hey, he's got no doubt that they'll be able to run the ball. So those guys in that room are a big reason why they're happy with that group, even with Irvin and Ramir Johnson a little bit dinged up this spring. And talking about positions that are dinged up, again, Rule said today, wide receiver is one of those groups. You've got guys like Malachi Coleman and Demetrius Bell, who's been limited throughout this kind of practice campaign. But you look at some of the others that we've seen from practice and we've heard from coaches, obviously, Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair, those two transfers, they've been right at the top of that list. And kind of similar to Emma Johnson, Jalen Lloyd continuing that growth from the fall.
Yeah, that one doesn't surprise me either. Just being able to see what he's done on the track with jumps, how that is going to help propel him forward even more on the football field, I'm really interested to see. But yeah, as I pointed out in another podcast that I do, he's going to be the non-quarterback on offense that I'm going to be watching closest.
Good one to watch, because threat of breakaway plays, big play threat certainly there with Lloyd. And yeah, I'll just be interested in that wide receiver room, because the limited depth, that Rule mentioned, it's going to be a real test, because there are a lot of young, redshirt freshmen, young guys in that room who could step up there. So one of those position groups to watch their wide receiver in total. And the tight ends, I don't think there's any surprise here. We expect to see Thomas Fidoni in a big role. And of course, Nate Borkacher, has been a big contributor, but Luke Lindenmeyer is a guy this coaching staff really likes. They mentioned his blocking throughout last year, and developing as a pass catcher too is a big thing. And as well, Marcus Satterfield working with that room this spring has certainly been a big boost to those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a more natural fit for Marcus, working with those guys. Not to say that he doesn't know how to work with quarterbacks. He's an offensive coordinator. But I just think that they're, with Thomas coaching the QBs, something he's done for a long time. Satterfield working with the tight ends, something he's done off and on for a long time. I just think that uses their resources most effectively. But yeah, no, Lindenmeyer, that was a name that also got brought up this week as somebody that Marcus Satterfield named specifically as one of the guys that is kind of flown under the radar a little bit that maybe shouldn't be.
Yeah, so another guy to watch for there on Saturday. And then the offensive line unit. Certainly you look at projecting, the starting five for the fall would be a very veteran, tight-knit group. That's what we've heard from the team. But of course, spring game, you get spread out a little bit more. That depth gets tested. But, looking big picture, it's very clear you've got these guys like Ben Scott, Teddy Prohaska, Bryce Benhart, Turner Corcoran, who's not practicing but still playing a big role. I mean, these guys are furthering the growth of the young players. And certainly there's been a lot of good recommendations about how this offensive line has looked. Whether it's defensive players, offensive teammates, they're saying those guys have had a really good spring.
Yeah, and I believe it. You look at some of the younger guys that they came in for the spring last year and the growth that they've been able to make. Really interested to see what that looks like for some of those guys like Slam Sledge and Gunnar Gatula, having already had an off-season program, but now they get their second one. And the lessons that they will continue to learn as they work with this really veteran offensive line.
Yeah, and spring game, huge for the O-line, because you get a lot of plays, coming at you quick, running all over. So that will certainly be a test of that group, those young players, how they've progressed. But as we mentioned, you look at the defensive side of the ball, and it's not to say that they don't have young talent. There's a ton of young talent there. You just look at, hey, who's going to be the starting 11 on the field in the fall? And there are a ton of veterans, returning starters. So it's been very interesting. I think, some of the repetition, breakdowns this spring, they've got, that 3-field setup, the veterans kind of hanging out, playing a little bit less in the scrimmages. I think especially for this defense, that's been big to get some of those young guys a lot of reps. And in the D-line room, you got Nash Maker, Ty Robinson, like those are guys who Rule said at the beginning of spring, like they played 1,000, downs of football. Like they don't need to be going full tilt this spring. So that's allowed a lot of the young guys in that room. You look at maybe a Riley Van Poppel or Vincent Carroll Jackson, those two young players, how they've been able to grow. And I think we can expect probably a lot of production from this hungry defensive line.
Oh, yeah, without question. I think that Ty coming back is going to be really, really good for him once it gets to the fall. But as of right now, he's learning a lot from like a bigger scheme perspective because he's getting to help teach some of those younger guys. When you're in the moment, you're only focusing on what you need to do. But when you step back and you're helping coach, you get to see the bigger picture. And I think that will help him not just this fall, but as he, wants to make himself the best NFL prospect that he can.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. And elsewhere throughout the defense, I think you could say there's a lot of good players. Where they fit into this defense is maybe a little bit less certain right now, and that's something we'll certainly be watching in the linebacker room.
Mm-hmm.
You've got all sorts of guys there: Mekhi Bear, John Bullock, Javen Wright, just to name a few. And those starting spots that are up for grabs. Certainly, you'd expect the guys who played in a big role last year, they're going to have that advantage. And, Bullock, him coming back was a big boost to this defense, potentially in that middle linebacker role. But they rotate at these spots a lot. So, of course, throughout the spring, this is going to be important, to develop that depth. And what you've heard, the true freshman on campus, Vincent Shavers, that's a guy whose name's been thrown around a ton. And so it sounds like certainly this linebacker room, they've really done a good job at so far bringing those young guys along, building this depth up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's inside linebackers. That's one of the positions that I'm going to be watching a little bit more closely on Saturday, just because, yeah, you bring a lot of guys back, but at that position specifically, you lose like 2 guys who've done it at a high level for a really long time. So what's that look like without those 2? Who gets the additional reps? Obviously, Bullock is one that you would naturally gravitate to, but is there any unsung guy that makes a step forward there? We'll see.
Yeah, and I really always like watching how the jack linebackers go about their business. It's fun, pass rush, coverage. They've got to keep their head on their toes, but certainly that group this time around is a lot of veterans, Chief Borders, MJ Sherman, Prince Will, who's been limited this spring. So again, inside linebacker, that's probably the main focus there in that position group to watch there on Saturday. And then in the secondary, once again, there's a ton of guys. You look at, of course, the safeties that are coming back: Marquise Buford, Deshaun Singleton, Isaac Gifford. But how much those guys are going to play Saturday? Limited. Singleton, of course, he's been limited throughout this spring. So there's going to be a huge opportunity for the young guys in that room to kind of make their mark. And based on, what the Nebraska offense did in this last scrimmage, you'd think that the secondary is going to need to step up in front of the fans.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah. So as we talk about this spring game, let's talk about, hey, what's the game going to look like? Because it does look different, many different years. Of course, depending on where you go for programs, different programs run things differently. And Matt Rule saying today, they're going to play a game of football.
Good.
Yeah.
He had a really funny point, too, that he made. He's like, yeah, we did like the offense versus defense thing one year. And I'm like, wait a minute. How does this work? What's the points here? Yeah, so glad we're not getting that. Because if the head coach is confused during that situation, most everybody probably else is too. So real game of football with a few caveats. Quarterbacks will not be live. And then special teams will be kind of live, but more thudding. So they will kick, they will punt. He's stealing that from Georgia's spring game, which he watched, because he, doesn't want any added risk of injuries, but also wants guys to practice, tackling and, doing the things that make football. But yeah, doesn't want to run the added risk of injuries because special teams is where a lot of those happen. So thudding on special teams. But yeah, no, just about everything else though.
Yep. Normal
football.
Normal game format for most things. And of course, like always, they'll have Big Ten officials or, whatever conference officials that they bring in. Game will go normally as expected, but in terms of the roster makeup, it's always going to be a little bit of a balancing act. You want to get that first string offense, first string defense, some good valuable reps against each other, but some players will rotate, based on the number of available, healthy players they have per position. Rule today, he was saying the quarterbacks will get the chance to rotate a little bit, play with some different teammates. The offensive linemen will, again, likely wear gray, rotate between teams as needed, as they did last year. He did mention wide receivers, that group that's been affected a little bit. So we'll wait and see what shakes out there. But
wouldn't surprise me if it's those guys wore gray too.
Could be something similar.
Just they don't have, a whole lot of bodies to make that one work perfectly, which is okay.
Yeah, you can imagine, when they're doing like a 4 wide receiver set, they gotta be like, come on, go to the other sideline or something like that. So we'll see how the depth shakes out. But as Rule said, the veteran, maybe 6th-year guys who they might have held out of these previous scrimmages behind closed doors, expects them to, maybe get a play or two, shake off the rust a little bit, but they're not going to be out there for a whole quarter or anything like that.
No, maybe a series.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yep.
We'll see.
Yep. Be smart with those guys. That has been kind of the focus for those veterans this spring. So that's what we expect to look for at the spring game. It's always a good chance to see if a young player is going to flash or not. So that will be kind of the main focus, see how this young, untested offense shakes out against a veteran, mostly Husker defense. But before we get to that, also baseball, softball going on this weekend. It's going to be a very busy Saturday there, in that corner of Lincoln. The spring game and then softball starting up right after, baseball also within the hour there after that spring game ends. And both these teams are doing their part to try and secure their spot in the NCAA tournament. A big issue for the Nebraska team, their stumbling block, it's been these midweek games. We've seen this quite often, but now 0-4 in their last 4 midweek, 2 losses to Creighton and 2 to Kansas.
Yeah, can't do that. I don't know what the issue is there. They have such a gem and a Friday starter, but they just cannot figure out their midweek pitching, feels like. And it's not just this season, right?
Yeah.
Last season had their issues there too. So you hope they get it figured out next year, but not great.
Yeah, and I mean, this most recent midweek loss to Kansas, they just fell behind. I think it was like a 5 or 6 run hole that they had to try to get out of. And obviously, it's a very talented Nebraska hitting order, but we've seen a lot of these midweek games as they tend to go with limited pitching depth, 9, 10 runs. And that is, of course, a challenge for any team to overcome. So something to keep in mind, as they move forward, these losses, that, of course, does impact your RPI, but continuing to go strong in the conference. Nebraska's tied for 2nd in the Big Ten. And these 2 most recent weekend series, a little bit disappointing on the road to Rutgers, a couple close losses. They lost that series, dropped 2 out of 3. And then this most recent one against Maryland, won the series. Again, dropped 1 game. But, in the big picture, of course, they're going to be happy with where they stand. But some really, really important series coming up. Iowa is the next team coming to town. 3-game series this weekend. And, of course, this Nebraska team, they're projected to be an NCAA tournament team, and you got to keep winning these games to keep that projection accurate.
Yeah, you need to keep winning these games. But also, with this weekend, you need the wins. Will they get them all in? The weather forecast is not looking great for this weekend.
Yeah, a lot of rain projected to come in throughout all 3 days. So we'll see if they can get those games in. And in terms of the NCAA postseason picture, the most recent Baseball America bracketology, they have Nebraska as the Big Ten champion, a number 2 regional seed. And that's reasonably the path to the tournament, winning the Big Ten, because if they don't, if they're trying to get in that large bid, of course, that RPI will come into play. That'd be a little bit more dicey. So Nebraska, again, continuing to try to improve that regular season record and prepare itself for that Big Ten tournament. And whereas the softball team, it's a little bit more crunch time, fewer series because that season starts earlier, postseason starts earlier. And this Nebraska softball team really battling for its NCAA tournament hopes as well. Really damaging 3-game sweep. They lost out at Michigan. Some close losses. They had a really tough blown blown lead in one of those, but bounce back as they continue to do this team. They've suffered all these season-ending injuries, tough losses, and as head coach Rhonda Revelle put it amazingly on Tuesday, they take a licking and keep on kicking.
Incredible. It was incredible.
Yep. Which was totally accurate for what happened on Tuesday. Iowa comes to town for a doubleheader. First game, pitching duel. Nebraska wins on a walk-off. Second game, a lot more scoring, back and forth. Nebraska nearly blows the late lead, then wins on another walk-off. 2 in one night.
That was a lot, and I felt bad for you that you had to rewrite your story, and I'm just like, okay, bye. But yeah, it was nuts. 2 different people responsible for those walk-offs. Yeah. Bella Bacon in the first one, Ava Breadwell in the second. And what a hit for Ava. She crushed that.
Yeah, that thing was gone in like a second and a half.
She said she knew immediately that was going over the left field fence.
Yeah, and I mean, every time I talked to Rhonda Revelle throughout the season, it doesn't matter what adversity they come up against. She's always like, oh, this team's going to keep fighting. And very clear, it doesn't matter how many runs they're down. They're still in the ball game. And so those 2 walk-off wins, as emotional and, positive as that was, from that sense, it was so instrumental in keeping those postseason chances going because Nebraska is still one of those strongest teams in the Big Ten, and they have the biggest series of the season so far. The Big Ten leaders, Northwestern, they've only dropped 1 conference game. They're coming to town this weekend, and I was able to chat with a couple players. They're excited to get back at them because last season it was a couple 1-run blown losses out there on the road at Northwestern. So they feel that they're right there quality-wise, and if there's ever a series that this Nebraska team needed to show up, it's this one.
Oh, yeah, without question. If you can, I'm not going to say they're going to win them all, but if you can steal one, it'd be pretty big.
Yeah, and winning the series would be huge, of course, towards boosting that postseason resume. But as you mentioned, the threat of weather,
yes,
this is a big one, too. There's a jersey retirement, senior day as well in the cards for this Nebraska softball team this weekend. So they're going to have to see how do they get those games in because, typically, right, if you were going to play a doubleheader, right, your Friday game gets canceled, you play on Saturday. Well, there's a spring game going on, there's all sorts of stuff. Well, Saturday gets canceled, you play on Sunday. Well, they got to travel back. So it's like, oh, this is not a time of the year where you can really afford these weather impacted games because these are the ones that they need to get in.
Yep. We'll see what happens. I am not confident that they will get them all in.
Yeah. What's our 2 or 3? You think 2 or 3?
I think they get in 2.
Okay. Well, we'll go with that. That's the Journal Star prediction, weather prediction for this weekend. But of course, as we mentioned, it's going to be a busy Saturday, busy weekend. Lots of different Husker athletics going on, centered around that red-white spring game. We'll be there. We'll be watching all the players, all the action, see how it unfolds. So make sure to stay tuned for all the updates and coverage that we'll have for you at journalstar.com. That'll do it for this episode of the Life in the Red podcast. Appreciate all of you listeners and viewers, and we'll see you next time.